Recently, the Pokemon Company in Japan have revealed a number of cards for their Ancient Roar and Future Flash sets. Most likely, the cards that we're going to see today are going to be part of our Paradox Rift set, so let's take a look. I'm Jet from InThirdPerson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's look at this new round of cards that are most likely going to be part of our Paradox Rift set. Before we get into this video, I just quickly wanted to remind you that I am in the process of fundraising for Extra Life. All of the proceeds go towards the Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals, a network of 170 hospitals taking care of thousands of kids every day. If you are interested in supporting the cause, I will put a link in the description of the video, and if you donate at one of the 3 reward tiers, you can get some really cool 4x6 art of my spray paint art, including a signed Pokemon card from me. So here's a 4x6 print example. This is one of the art pieces from last year. This year's prints include this Mew one, this Pikachu one, and this Mario Kart one. They will be in 4x6 prints. I will write a thank you note on the back. All of the details are on the Extra Life page in the link in the description of this video. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. Now let's go back to the video. Armarouge EX has the ability Crimson Armor. When this Pokemon is at full HP, it takes 80 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. This makes this stage 1 EX have an effective HP of 340 when it's got full health, which is as high as we've seen any Pokemon in terms of like maximum HP. I know Blastoise technically higher with the effective HP, but 340 HP on a stage 1 Pokemon is ridiculous. And its attack, Scorching Bazooka, does 40 damage, and this attack does 40 more damage for each fire energy attached to this Pokemon. So it requires 2 colorless energy, but you probably don't want to play double turbo here since the damage is predicated on the number of fire energy that's attached. So if you've got 2 fire energy as the starting point, you are doing a base damage of 120. 120 damage isn't great. However, there are some ways to potentially boost that damage, whether that be Terra Charizard EX, which accelerates 3 fire energy to any of the Pokemon on the board, or Terra Skeledurge EX, which should also be coming as part of Paradox Rift, where this lets you boost your damage by 60 if you discard a fire energy. Theoretically, you could build an Armarouge deck around healing as well. If you move the Armarouge into the bench, the Armarouge EX, we do have the single prize Armarouge, which lets you move energy from your bench Pokemon to the active. So if you move the Armarouge EX to the bench, put something else in the active, and you move the fire energy to a Pokemon in the active, you heal the Armarouge with the Cheryl, and then you move the Armarouge EX back into the active, and then use the regular Armarouge to move the energy back. I know it's a lot, but it is theoretically possible to heal off your Armarouge EX, giving you that 340 effective HP again, which could be absolutely devastating if you can figure out the way of switching everything around. Last year, during the World Championships, the Pokemon Company talked a lot about the concept of comebacks in the Pokemon TCG and wanting to make cards that are going to make that more realistic. And we've seen cards like that, like Defiance Band and Iono. And here's the latest one. This is actually a reprint for Counter Catcher. You can only play this if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, but you get to switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot. Now, this is essentially boss's orders, but you have to be losing on prizes. The trade-off is this is an item card. You can boss up and then Iono in the same turn, or play Research or any of your other supporters for turn while also gusting a target into the active. This feels like an absolutely incredible card that pretty much every deck is going to have at least one, maybe a couple of these. I don't know. It just seems way too good to me to not include in pretty much any deck going forward. Speaking of comebacks, Defiance Vest lets you take 40 less damage from attacks if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent. Now, this does get a little awkward when the prizes are evened up or you're winning. This card does nothing. However, if you are playing a deck that is relying on being behind, or you just like the idea of having an extra 40 bulk if you are behind on prizes, this seems like a really solid card. Altaria EX has the ability Humming Heal. Once during your turn, you may heal 20 damage from each of your Pokemon. This also stacks, so if you have multiple Altaria on the board, you can heal 20 damage for each Altaria, which is awesome. And it does have the attack Light Pulse for 1 water and 1 metal energy. A little bit of a weird cost there, but dragon Pokemon are like that. It does 140 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all effects and of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to this Pokemon. And damage is not effect, so you'll still take hits, but you can't be confused, you can't be put to sleep, you can't get instantly knocked out by a Star Requiem, you can't get Lost Mind by Sableye, but this is only to the Altaria that did the attack. So it is a little limited and the damage is a bit low. Maybe this ends up becoming a Regidrago Pokemon that you throw in the mix. I don't know if this is strong enough as a deck in and of itself. 140 is not great, but if you've got multiple Altaria and you can heal a whole bunch, maybe you throw in a Radiant Serena as well, maybe this has some upside. Maushold EX has a very cool ability. Solidarity. If this Pokemon is in the active spot and it's damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, you put 3 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon for each of your Tandemaus and Maushold in play. And if you can completely fill the board with Tandemaus and Maushold, you are going to be doing 180 damage when you get hit. If you put something like a Vengeful Punch on there and you get knocked out, that's 220 damage for getting hit, which is absolutely awesome. I don't know if the strategy of filling your board with Maushold and Tandemauses is going to work, but it is at the very least a very cool concept to play around. It also has the attack Greedy Fangs for 2 colorless energy, does 120 damage, and you draw 2 cards. Being able to draw 2 cards is really nice because you probably will not have a draw engine in this deck if you're trying to fill your board with Tandemauses and Mausholds. But yeah, and you're also probably using double colorless energy to power this up, so it's more like 100 damage. But if you're able to do 100 damage and then they take 180 to 200 more, 220 more if you've got the Vengeful Punch, they're going to be taking most of the damage by attacking you, which is very interesting. We have a new set of Simisage, Simisear, and Pansear cards that all work together with the Monkey Trio ability. Now, it's only Simisage and Simisear that have the ability. However, if all 3 of them are in play, Simisage, Simisear, and Pansear, you ignore all colorless costs in the attacks of these Pokemon. And now their attack costs are really high, but if you can put them all on the board together, then you make their attacks a lot more usable. If you can get that Grass Energy on, or you use something like Luminous Energy to cover that cost, you get the attack Arm Thrust Needle, which does 100 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon that have an ability except any Simisage. So this is essentially Alolan Vulpix V-Star, where you can just stop damage from opponents with abilities. It's less damage that you are doing, but within the context of your Monkey Trio deck, this is an interesting attack to use. Simisear is the heavy hitter of the group for 1 fire energy. You do 190 damage, and this Pokemon also does 30 damage to itself. You probably want to use this as a finishing attack while stalling with the Simisage in the meantime. Last but not least is Simipour. This might actually be least, to be honest. For 1 water and 2 colorless, Shower with Insults does 50 damage and 30 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. I like the idea of the spread damage for only 1 energy, but if your opponent has Manaphy, which a lot of decks run Manaphy these days, that 30 damage is going to get blocked. So something to keep in mind there. Overall, I think that the concept is interesting. I don't necessarily think it's strong enough to be meta relevant or anything like that, but it is a cool concept to play around with. Toedscruel has a terrible attack, but its ability, Mycelium Colony, has a very cool effect. Cards in your opponent's discard pile can't be put into their hand through the effects of trainer cards or abilities they use, so cards like Clara will not work. You can't get your Pokemon and your basic energy back. Superior Energy Retrieval and Energy Retrieval, none of those cards will work if Toedscruel is in play. Chien-Pao could be in trouble if people are teching this in because they respect the matchup enough. Or Rescue Carrier, that card does not work as well if Toedscruel is in play. These are just a couple of examples of cards that do not work with Toedscruel in play, which make this a very intriguing option to tech into your deck. Toedscruel doesn't block every form of recovery though from the discard pile. We still can use Super Rod because that puts cards back into the deck. We can still use Dark Patch because it attaches energy directly to the Pokemon. And cards like Rotom V-Star, which attack by discarding items, putting items from the discard pile to the Lost Zone, that attack will still work because it's moving stuff to the Lost Zone and not going back into your hand. Golisopod EX is a stage 1 with 270 HP. Its first attack is bad, but its second attack, Strategic Retreat with water and 2 colorless, is at least interesting. You do 170 damage, and you get to switch this Pokemon with one from your bench. You could use this to do some hit and run strategies with something like Mimikyu to block attacks from Pokemon V and EX. Could use Klefki to switch into, which shuts off abilities on basic Pokemon, or we could switch into the new Snorlax, which we'll talk about in a sec. I don't know if Golisopod is going to be good enough because I think that its attack cost might be a bit too high and its damage output might be a bit too low, but there are some things to play around with that card. Snorlax Doll is the latest doll in the Pokemon trading card game. We have seen doll cards in the past where they are not Pokemon, but you can play them like Pokemon, and that's still the case here. You can play the Snorlax doll, which has 120 HP, can't be affected by effects of your opponent's attacks, and if it gets knocked out, your opponent does not get a prize. And this one, unlike dolls in the past, this one has a whopping 120 HP. However, unlike dolls of the past, you can only play this if you have it in your starting hand and where you can bench it there. At any other point in the game, you cannot play this card, so it does kind of limit the power level and the potential toxicity of this card to, switch out and prevent your opponent from taking a whole bunch of prizes throughout the game. So I kind of like the balance of this one. In theory, it'll be very cool to see the possibilities that people come up with for using this doll. Magby is a baby Pokemon, which has the attack Gradual Heater for no energy. During your opponent's next turn, if this Pokemon is damaged by an attack, even if it's knocked out, put 6 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. I don't think this is very good at all, so let's move on. Tatsugiri is much better than Magby. For 2 colorless energy, you have the attack Survival Strategy. Search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. You may switch this Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. Now, having to attach a double turbo energy here to get this rolling in one go kinda sucks. However, grabbing 2 cards of your choice and then moving a Pokemon into the active outside of the Tatsugiri, you could use a little bit of a hit and run with the Mimikyu or the Klefki, could make this a little more viable. And if you're playing a deck that accelerates energy without needing that initial attachment, this could be kind of cool. Tinkaton already has a bunch of cards in the Scarlet and Violet era, and it's getting one more here. Its first attack, Crushing Blow, does 30 damage, and you discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon, and that can be particularly devastating against decks with special energy where it's not easy to recover, or just any sort of discarding energy can be very nice. I'm not sure the damage is enough, but the energy disruption could be enough to get you going. On top of that, we have the Alloy Hammer attack for 1 psychic energy, does 60 damage, and if this Pokemon has any metal energy attached, this attack does 120 more damage. You are doing 180 damage on a single prize Pokemon for only 2 energy. Now, the psychic and metal cost is a little weird, but it is theoretically possible, and I'm very curious to see how players mix this in to make this work, because this could pair well with Tinkaton EX, could pair with the other Tinkatons we've seen in the past. I'm not ready to write this off as garbage, but there is some potential here. Espathra has the ability All Seeing. When you evolve into it, you get to prevent all damage from and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon, making it effectively a wall, which is potentially intriguing. Its attack Glitterize for 2 psychic energy does 70 damage, and if you have Tulip in your discard pile, this attack does 70 more damage. So 140 damage. If you've got Tulip in the discard pile, you get to wall off. I don't think this is going to be good enough, because how are you... I mean, you could set up multiple Espathras and then have like the Xatu engine from Paradox Rift to accelerate energy and potentially have multiples of these going at once. I'm not sure this is going to wall off enough, at least as its own deck concept. Maybe it's a one of in certain other decks that maybe use the Xatu engine for energy acceleration. Like I could see it pairing potentially with the upcoming Terra Mewtwo EX. But as a deck in and of itself, I don't think it's strong enough. Crobat has a cool control attack with Mad Echo for 2 colorless energy, does 50 damage, and choose item cards or supporter cards. During your opponent's next turn, they can't play any of that type of trainer card from their hand. This is a very annoying card. However, only being able to shut off supporters or trainer or item cards is kind of annoying, because they still get some access to stuff. Maybe this pairs well with the Grabber card from 151. You can not only look at your opponent's hand and toss away a Pokemon or put it to the bottom of their deck, but because you get to look at their hand, you get to see what mix of items and supporters, and then you can make a more informed call on whether you want to disable items or supporters. Tons of cards to look at today. Lots of interesting cards coming as part of Paradox Rift. This set looks absolutely insane. From a gameplay perspective, there are so many game-changing cards, and while the cards we looked at today maybe not potentially great game-breaking cards like Iron Hands EX or anything like that, I do think there are a lot of creative possibilities to mix these cards into the current pool or make some new decks entirely. But what say you? Let me know in the comments below. Are you excited for Paradox Rift? Are there any cards in this set from whether this video or other ones you've seen in the past that are tickling your fancy? Do you think Iron Hands is completely broken? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at @InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at @InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.